Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kamila Stępień-Kutera and I welcome you in our competition studio. I welcome also my distinguished guest, Professor Karol Berger.
I'm delighted to be here.
The important thing about Chopin, we learned it at school already, is that he had a special attitude toward the genres, musical genre. And among others, he in fact invented a new genre, a new form, I mean the ballad. If we shall explain just in few words, what is the instrumental ballad? Because he had some models in literature, of course, in songs, because we had songs named ballads, and how he translated it for the instrumental piece.
It's funny that you should start with that, because in a way you are starting right at the very center of what is great about Chopin. He is a master of large form, and ballad is perhaps the most important example of his originality in treatment of large form. Now, you of course will object, what do you mean large form? A ballad, 9 minutes, 13 minutes at the very most if someone plays very slowly. How can this be a large form? But actually 9 or 13 minutes in music is very much. When Chopin begins, or for his generation, a large pianistic form is a sonata. He of course writes sonatas too. Great, at least 2 of them are masterpieces. But it is precisely in the ballad that he invents something that no one else is doing at the time. Certainly no one else is doing it with this kind of originality, namely one movement, not a 4 movement like a sonata, but a 1 movement piece that is much more than a simple ABA dance or a nocturne or prelude or something of this case. And he does take certain elements from a sonata allegro. There are 2 themes, for example. There is an exposition, there is a development, there is a recapitulation, but he completely rethinks it, which is not the case with even his greatest contemporaries. This is not something that Schumann can do. This is not something that Mendelssohn can do. Well, Liszt will do it in a very original way, but later on. But in the first half of the 19th century, Chopin is really unique. The originality maybe consists in that, first of all, he does not create a contrast between the 2 themes. His 2 themes is a kind of a oscillation between them rather than a really strong contrast. He develops them in a very lyrical fashion. He does not clash. There's no clash between ideas. And he starts in a very reluctant, sort of slow way. He builds toward a climax which he postpones until very late. It is really, his developments don't really develop anything. There is rather a kind of a culmination. There is no resolution of tensions. On the contrary, the greatest tension is at the very end, and there is this kind of a fiery conflagration at the very end. He really invents a new kind of 1 movement form. Liszt in the 1850s will do something similar for symphonic music with symphonic poem. I think that Chopin's ballads are in a way a precursor of that. If you can, of course, to say precursor is a bit unfair, because I think that Liszt never achieves this kind of artistic level. But in terms of technical inventiveness, I think there is something that the 2 have in common.
And we know that ballad is narrative form. Well, we know. what does it mean, narrative form in music without words? Because again, narracy is the term taken from literature.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That is again a very central issue, but here Chopin is not unique. In this respect, Chopin shares something with his whole generation, namely this ambition to create music which suggests a program, suggests a story without offering any, right? So there is this narrative tone with it's a music that pretends to be telling a story, but it doesn't tell any concrete story, right? Mm-hmm. He starts the first ballad, the G minor ballad, with this kind of a bardic gesture of I don't know, trying a harp or something like this, and then the story gets underway. You have so there are these gestures of telling the story, but there is no story. There is no, you know, this idea that so many people did have and still have, that you could find a Mickiewicz ballad that fits exactly one of the Chopin's ballads. This is all nonsense. And actually we know that Chopin hated this kind of attitude. You know, he hated programmatic titles. He was very critical of his London publisher because he was adding all sorts of idiotic poetic titles to his work, which he didn't like. But nevertheless, there is this suggestion that there is a narrativity there without there being anything concrete or abstract. It's rather abstract form of storytelling rather than concrete storytelling.
But at the same time, he does not tell a specific story, but in his unfinished school of playing piano, or methods of playing piano, he writes that music is a language, but not literally, I think. It's rather a metaphor.
Yes, probably. I'm not entirely sure what he had in mind, but you are right that there are stories there that could be translated into language, but they are not language of the kind that this is Świtezianka or something like that, or it is rather that this is a story that starts in a rather lyrical fashion and then becomes very gradually the tension rises, and then there is this conflagration at the end, some sort of fiery, catastrophic ending. So this is a story too. But it is a story without concrete characters, without concrete events that could be translated into a literary form.
I wonder, because we started with the ballad, and it is a rather mature form, and after that he developed his style. But his earlier pieces, for example, concertos, are also masterpieces, in fact, of that time. Are they also narrative? Can we say like that?
No, not really. Not any more than Mozart concertos, let's say. Yes, of course, there is a middle movement which is very poetic and which has an atmosphere of certain kinds which could be actually named. So in this sense, you could say, but I don't think the pleasure of these earlier pieces, the pleasure of the concertos are different, I think, than the pleasure of mature Chopin. This is rather somebody who is very young and somebody who is full of energy and full of youthful temperament, and I think this is what we love about these pieces, rather than intellectual complexity and maybe even very special emotional complexity. I don't want to put these concertos down. I love them, but you know, there is Chopin has developed between these pieces and the pieces with which we started. And of course, we are not talking only about ballades. There is, of course, Barcarolle, which belongs in the same family, and above all, the Polonaise Fantasie, which is the pinnacle of this whole development. I mean, Polonaise Fantasie and Last Ballad are probably his greatest achievements. Szklener is his greatest achievements in this large form.
The subject, of course, is too wide to discuss it with details in such a short conversation. So thank you very much for the inspiring talk.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.